Excellent. Right, we shall make a start then. So yeah, thank you all for joining us this evening. So this is an introduction to fishery management planning. Now, this is a big subject. You know, we could sit here all night and we could go. You could probably break down each of these subsections of this presentation and spend the whole evening going in depth into each of them. But what I've tried to do is to break it down into some of the key elements that we really need to consider. So if you just want to move it on a couple of slides, please, Alex, and we'll go past that. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, what I've tried to do is break it down into a few key sections. So we're going to have a look at what actually is a management plan. What are we talking about? I'm sure you've come across these sort of plans and things in the past with other areas. What information do we need to gather? Then we're going to start looking at some of the more specifics, a bit on the ecology, a bit on the environmental requirements. And we're going to talk about three key areas here. So look at how we can monitor, what we need to monitor. We're going to look at our fish stock, and we're going to look at fish health. And then at the end, I've sort of added in just a little bit of a list of other things we can think about as well. And maybe if we've got 5 minutes at the end, we'll touch on those as well. So if you just want to shift on, please, Alex. So what is a management plan? So really, every fishery ideally should have a management plan, and it should have been developed with the group. If you're an angling club or an association and you've got a committee or you've got a team, we need to engage all of those people. If it's a solitary, if you're on your own and you're managing your own water, then happy days. When maybe we won't, go into such great depth and start writing things down. But if you're working as a committee or as a group or in some sort of a cohesive way, then we need to sort of really get that plan put down on paper so that if anybody ever changes roles or moves on, we've got something there. So really what this plan is looking at is, so what I should have said at the beginning as well is I've come to this as an existing fishery. So this is about fishery management planning where you've got an existing body of water. If you was starting from bare earth and it was digging it from scratch, it would be slightly different. So this is taken from the situation of having a body of water and how we're going to look at management, coming up with a plan for the management of that body of water. So we're going to look at our analyze that current situation in the fishery, set out the principles that we should be followed in management. What type of management strategy are we going to take on here? And obviously, with any of these management plans, no matter what it is, you want some defined goals and objectives for the fishery. Where do we want that fishery to be? What do we want that fishery to be? And how are we going to get there? What's our aims, our goals, and our objectives? How are we going to achieve them? What steps can we make to put them in to get to there? And then importantly here, because we're talking about active fisheries, open waters, we're going to have many stakeholders, users. You might have other users you might want to consider. You might share your lake with a boating club, or it might be partly managed by a wildlife group. So we need to consider all of those stakeholders within our management plan. And then we need to define how we're going to monitor it. How are we going to look? We're going to put our plan in place. What monitoring are we going to do to make sure we're sticking to that plan? And this may be something that we come back to at committee meetings. We have our annual or our 6 monthly or quarterly, whatever it might be, management meeting, and we're going to bring out this plan and we're going to look at it and we're going to assess it and we're going to look at see where we are on our steps to getting towards that that end goal. So that's really what we're talking about here, and it isn't done as an afterthought. It's done right at the beginning, and we've got those clear steps in place. I just want to move on, please, Alex. So this is really important. This is something we come across quite often when we're looking at fishery types. You cannot be all things to all anglers. One fishery, very rarely will a fishery tick all of the boxes for all of the angler types out there. If you're a dedicated specimen carp or specimen fish water, it's not going to be ideal for most match anglers. And I've put most in brackets there because I fish a match every year on one of our local sort of specimen lakes, and it's a brilliant sort of silverfish water. We fish it in the autumn, when the back end of the autumn, when a lot of the specimen lads are thinking about wrapping up for the colder months, and we fish for standard roach tactics, and we catch a shed full. And the reverse of that, of course, is that high stock waters, carp, monoculture type single species ones, and don't have the right size of fish for specimen anglers. It may get there in time, as those fish grow and develop. It may be that they start to get into that size bracket that, when we start to define them as sort of runs waters for specimen anglers. But predominantly they're not. You're ticking one box or the other. And you've got to be realistic here as well, haven't you? You can't make a 1 acre farm pond be as productive or as diverse as a 10 acre gravel pit. You've got to cut your cloth accordingly. And this is what we keep saying here: keep it simple, keep it short. Your plans have to run to 15, 20, 30 pages. Keep it nice and simple, nice and short, and be realistic in your expectations. And again, the bigger the water, the more planning you're going to need, the more work you're going to have to put into it. So therefore, you might need to just limit, put some limits on what you think you can realistically achieve it, and with the funds and the manpower you've maybe got to hand. Next slide, please, Alex. So there's a lot of info. We need to get a lot of information to help us build our plan. A lot of it, some of it's fairly straightforward. We can go out and we can do some simple sort of surveys. We can use some of these modern sort of mapping pieces of software to get surface area. We can obviously define the shape. We can look at depths, and I'll touch on some ways we look at depths in a second. We can go out and we can start to do some actual surveying, look at vegetation types. We can look at coverage. I've put in here as well, we can look at vegetation status. So when you're talking about things like big trees, if you've got a lot of tree cover, considering what's happened over the weekend, the status of these trees is quite important. Are they safe? Are they secured? Have any of them got any sort of tree preservation orders on them? Are any of them looking a little bit sort of sketchy and are likely to come down in the next storm? It's important to have that mapped out and sort of be aware of those things. And we can start to look at other elements of water quality parameters, obviously really important to the health of our fish stock, where our anglers are going to be. Then we need to look externally to that. Have we got any areas of impact? Have we got any drains running through the site? Have we got any inlets that we might need to be aware of? Does that limit to so any of the restrictions we've got on the site as to what we can and can't do on there? It tied in with that, with any areas. Is it got any designations on it? Is it a triple SI? Is it an SAC? Is it an SPA? There's lots of things we need to really sort of be gathering information together to form our plan. And then obviously we're going to look at things like stock biomass. How many fish have we got? What's our composition? And the health of that stock as well. And also tied into that, what are our neighbours like? It's often we look at our fisheries independently, but there might be other areas we've got to be wary of. What's your access point? Do you have to go through other people's land? If you change your fishery type from a low number syndicate water, with 20 syndicate members to you open it up for day tickets and there's suddenly 30 people, 40 people a day going down the track. Is that going to have an impact on how effective your fishery, our fishery is? Next slide, please, Alex. And these are just some simple lake survey types. I borrowed these pictures, the two nicely coloured pictures from the Environment Agency. There was the team down in the Ouse and Fenland team that put them on their Facebook page. So thank you to them guys for those. And this is just using simple sonar technology to get a real fine scale idea of the depths of the pond. If you look at the one on your left with the blue and the red, you can see on there that's sort of defining the depths of those bodies of water. If you look at the one on the right, that goes into a little bit more detail. That's actually a substrate hardness map, and that's done through a piece of software called Biobase. And you can use this software with a standard sort of sonar system and actually be able to work out substrate. You can work out vegetation coverage on it. And it's a pretty snazzy piece of kit. So if anybody's interested in any of that, and I suggest you have a conversation with your local EA guys. The top picture there with all the fish on is just done by a deeper sonar, just cast about into a pond and getting an idea of sort of depths. And the green line on there is aquatic vegetation. And those pings coming back are all fish. And then we can even do it the hardcore manual carp angler way, can't we? And take a marker float and a lead out and go and thrash the water to a foam and start recording some depth data using that. And even we're talking about consulting users and things. If you've got specimen anglers on there who've got bait boats these days with fish finders and depth finders and things on them. Often they've got fairly decent maps and maybe rudimentary compared to some of the images on there, but gather that data in and again just feed it all into what you're all into the plan that you're building. Next slide please, Alex. And again, if you're not sure about what you're dealing with and you want to go walk around your lake, get yourself a map, get yourself some ID books, get yourself a rake, and just start and have a bit of a a learning session. Take a book out, take some your phone or a decent camera, get some pictures, some images, and go back and start to really sort of map out the coverage of your aquatic vegetation within your pond. And again, whilst you're out there, look out for anything that might be potentially invasive, either non-native invasive. There's lots of non-native invasive plants out there, but also native species that might become invasive. Things like your Norfolk reed, your Phragmites beds, great plants, but can become particularly invasive and troublesome if put in the wrong areas. So all of this is starting to help you to form an idea of what your lake looks like, or what your fishery looks like, what the depths are like, what the vegetation is like, how much open water you've got, and you can start to build that picture, which makes the next stages a bit easier. So next one, please, Alex. And again, just to look at the breakdown of your aquatic vegetation. You've got those 4 types. So you've got emergent plants, you've got those rooted with floating leaves, you've got free floating types, you've got your fully submerged or aquatic plants, and then you've also got this sort of 5th group, these algae, these either free floating or these attached branched algae that we need to just be conscious of. And again, you can write that down. You can have a work party. Instead of you going and doing maintenance on the fishery, you send everybody out and you get them to start to map particular areas so you can get an understanding of what sort of your aquatic vegetation is like. And again, the anglers will probably be able to tell you, well, if you chuck out 50, 60 yards, you come back with this type of weed, and they'll often have a picture of it. And then again, you can start to feed all that into your planning. Next slide, Alex, please. So important points here. We are working with living animals in a dynamic environment, and you have to bear this in mind. You should always work with best ecological principles in mind. And what we're trying to get here is this balance, aren't we, between an effective, productive fishery and healthy and happy, if you like, balance of fish and plants and invertebrates and water quality and all of it sort of living together. And that's what creates this nice ecological balance. And if you can get, your water to be in this nice equilibrium, if you like, the less interventions you're going to have to make as a management team. And it's important as well when you start looking at this that animals have particular areas in which they prefer to live, and these areas can be really can be quite small. If you're looking at benthic living invertebrates, they like the sand and gravel and sediment and silt, and then in open water for larger fish. And these areas, that they actually prefer can change. It can change over the period of a day. They can change over throughout the seasons. And it's important that we think about and encourage this this sort of biodiversity, this wider biodiversity within the water and within our plan. And this is where we start to think about this range of habitat types within our fishery. We don't just want a bath. We don't just want fish in water. That's not how fish are designed to live. It's not how your ecological principles should act. When you think, well, I'm just going to dig a hole, fill it full of water, sling a lot of fish in, and we'll just chuck pellets at them, and that'll be happy. No, they won't. That's not what we're aiming for. So if you just put the next slide up, Alex, I can just explain this. You'll often hear people, particularly in terrestrial ecology and terrestrial land management, talk about this mosaic of habitats, and you'll see it here. That picture in the bottom left-hand corner, that's actually a brownfield site. But if you was to actually go and look at that in detail, you'll see there you've got tall grasses, you've got short grasses, you've got areas of bare earth, you've got some tall shrubs, you've got some trees in there, you've got some high banks, you've got some low banks. And these are really important because each of those areas supports a different number of species or different specialists, if you like, that like those particular areas. And then if you look at the picture on the right hand side, which is a sort of margins of a lake, you can start to see that relationship between this mosaic of different habitats. You can see there we've got some emergent reed stems, you've got some Phragmites there, you've got little free floating plants, you've got some little duckweeds in there, you've got some rushes in there, some sedges, you've got some flowering plants, some tiny little lilies in there. And that's a mosaic of different habitats. You've got a whole mixture of different vegetation types within that one frame. I think the chap who was in this actually counted them. There's about 20-25 different plants going on in that one little picture. And this is really important, particularly when you look at that picture of the fry in the top there. That's their habitat. They want, well, for a start, the fish are spawning in there, the fish hatch within there, and that's the area they want to live and grow in for the first days of their lives. It's secure, it's warm, it's got somewhere for them to attach and somewhere for them to start feeding. So it's really important that we have areas within our lake, in our fishery, I'm not saying it has to be all of it, that has these different habitat types where each, where these fish can live and feel comfortable. Next slide, please, Alex. And again, this is just showing that. This is a slide I've taken from a Wild Trout Trust handbook, talking about habitat bottlenecks. What we're trying to get to here is that top left image where you've got no limiting factors, and you've got juvenile, you've got spawning habitat, you've got juvenile habitat, and you've got adult habitat. And if you start to get those all in sync, then you're going to have this self-sustaining recruiting population. And if any of those areas are limiting, you start to see a decrease in that particular area. And the thing to remember here, when you're talking about lake habitats, is to have those areas that might be sort of interconnected, so you don't have gaps between what might be good spawning areas and what might be good fry juvenile areas and your habitat and your adult areas. So we're talking really about getting it all working, the whole habitat and the whole ecosystem working cohesively, so we can start to see good habitat for all of the life stages of the fish that were that are in our water. Next slide, please, Alex. And moving that on, and talking about these relationships between the whole of the flora and fauna within that fishery. You can see a generalized food web here. Yes, all right, maybe it's for a river. But what we're looking at here is, that we've got to understand the complexity of that relationships between all of these living organisms within the ecosystem. The varied habitats in still waters, you'll see that some of these animals, we've got arrows going in different directions, and that's showing that transfer of energy as we start to move up, as animals predate on each other. And these relationships can change, can change through the year, they can change with the seasons. And what we're trying to get here is that it might just look like a simple body of water, but there's lots and lots of mini relationships and interactions going on under the water. And if for any reason we was to take out one of these areas of the web, or one of these key elements, what would happen to the levels, those layers beneath them? Would we start to see knock-on effects that might have a detrimental impact? Eventually, what we want to get to here for our fishery is the trout, or the roach, or the carp, or the bream, or whatever it might be. But you can see how all those stages beneath them are linked. They're all intrinsically linked to each other, and we need to be aware of that if we're going to try and get that sort of balanced ecological ecosystem going on. But next slide, please, Alex. And again, this is a slide we put together for some of the other work that we regularly do, and this is just looking at fisheries welfare. And you'll see on there all of the elements that we're talking about in our management planning. Have we got the right species? Have we got the right habitat? Have we got any artificial shelter against predation, which we'll touch on? Nutrition, which will come into it. Do we want to be supplementary feeding at the right times of year and with the right diet, or if angler numbers drop off, or if we put new stock in? And you can start to see that this animal welfare and fisheries welfare is at the heart, but lots and lots of areas of our management plan and the thinking we're doing are all geared towards the overall welfare and the health of that fishery. And you could take all of these factors and pull them off into your management plan, and they could all have their own little heading as to how you're going to, to create the best environment that you can. It's just something to, really to consider. And again, looking at the red arrows is how they're all sort of linked together. Stock health is linked to supplementary feeding and nutrition, which is linked to water, and they're also linked to water quality and the amount of fish we've got there. So they're all sit, they're not independent, they're all interlinked, and we need to make sure that we're considering them all when we start to be putting our plans together. Next slide, please, Alex. So looking at this, environmental requirements of different species, and you've got two very distinct environments here, haven't you? You've got that upland hill stream, highly energetic, highly oxygenated, very fast flowing water, turbulent. It suits a particular group or species of fish. And then you look at in the one on the right hand side, you've got a heavily weeded, vegetated farm pond, pretty eutrophic, don't look particularly appealing, but suits a particular group of fish. And those those fish that live in one would struggle to live in another. You could take you wouldn't take a 3 or 4 pound tench or a carp out of the weedy pond on the right and chuck it into the upland hill stream on the left and expect it to do particularly well. And likewise, you wouldn't take a brown trout or a salmon from the bullhead from the upper reaches here and put it into the farm pond. They're just not. That's not their environment, and they're not going to do particularly well. So it's just looking at making sure the environments are right for the species of fish that you're stocking. And if we just move it on, Alex, you'll start to see now we're looking at those environmental requirements with regards to a set of parameters, and this is where we start to bring water quality into it. And when we're looking here at some of those key water quality parameters, ones that we often measure on in our fisheries quite frequently. Obviously, oxygen is in there as a key one. That's linked to temperature. We've got pH, the acidity or the alkalinity of the water. The hardness of the water, depending on where you are in the country, it's the total dissolved elements within there and its ability to buffer and be stable. And then we've got a couple of sort of key pollutants in there, being ammonia, nitrite and nitrate, and these are linked, can be linked to external sources or can be linked to the byproducts and the waste of the fish that are within our fishery. Why are we talking about this and stressing these points? Well, because if we start to skew any of these elements, what we see is the fish within our waters become stressed. And when they become stressed, their behaviour is affected, they're less willing to feed, as a result we get poor fishing, their immune systems can become compromised, and we start to see them becoming susceptible to parasite burdens, to bacterial infections. Their breeding can be affected, so we get reduced productivity. So there's lots and lots of areas we need to consider when we're talking about getting the environmental requirements right. And again, if you just sort of slide it on, please, Alex. This is an old slide. It goes back to one of the famous books by Shepherd and Bromwich on intensive fish farming back in the 90s. It's just showing you that water isn't just the elements we need to give result aren't just water, oxygen, pH, hardness, solids, and some pollutants. There's a whole raft of other things. You'll often hear water referred to as the universal solvent. If you leave something in water long enough, it'll start to break down. But there's lots of other elements in there. And I'm not saying we're all going to go out and do a full suite of water quality tests looking for, copper at 0.006 parts per million. But it's just to show you that there are toxicity levels for fish, and this one is in relation to salmonids, obviously through the fish farming side of it. But there's a whole host of other things, and some of these elements are interlinked as well. So if we see a change in one element, it can make another element slightly more toxic. So we do need to just be aware of this when we start to look at it. I'm not saying you're going to necessarily see, lead poisoning and mercury poisoning within your fisheries, but it's just to show that, water is absolutely key to how you're putting your plans together, and the recording and the monitoring of water and water quality is really important. And next slide, Alex, please. So what we're aiming for really is a stable environment. We don't want to see really wild swings in any of these elements. So how we can record it and monitor it is by going out and checking. Yeah, and I'm sure you've all come across DO meters and probes, and that's an OxyGuard that chap's using there. The one of the best ones you can get. And then the system on the right is a new one on the market. This is the water quality monitoring system. It's an organizer, a company that we've been doing a bit of work with, and this is a fixed in situ water quality monitoring unit. It floats in your pond, and you can put various sensors underneath it, and it reads them on either every 30 seconds or every minute, and it just sends the data to an app, and you can just read it on your phone. You can put anything you want in there. But that one, the picture in the bottom right there, you can see it's got DO and pH and temperature in it, and it's basically plug and play, put it in place and leave it. And it's another method, another tool we've got now. As technology moves on, it's another tool in our toolbox, in our management toolbox, to help us better understand the sort of the water, and what this also allows us to do. We don't need to be out there, so we can see those diurnal changes over the day, night, and through the seasons, without us having to be out at first light with our DO probe to see what's going on overnight. So again, it's just tie that in with your mapping data earlier, with your depth and everything else. It's just another piece of technology. As things move on, we get better at being able to record what's happening within our waters. Next slide, please, Alex. I won't labour this point. This is just really just to show you that the importance of dissolved oxygen and its impacts on cold water species at the top, which is our salmonids, and our coarse fish species in the bottom, and where we're really sort of aiming to be for those, for that comfortable range, if you like, for most of our fish species. And we often say that that level we're looking for it is generally accepted to be around 5 milligrams a litre. Get much below that, we start to have an adverse effect on function and survival of biological communities. 3 milligrams a litre, and we're really pushing it. So we just that idea of planning and considering all of the elements as we start to think about how we're going to record our data on for our water, and how we can manage and manipulate it to suit the fish. Next slide, please. So moving on really now into looking at fish stocks, and what we're going to put in. I'd like to say that picture on the left there was a swim I was fishing in, but unfortunately not. And there's fish on the right hand side there. You'll see a nice net of crucians. We need to get round to thinking about stocking fish as being creating a nice environment, a nice balance of stock. And I appreciate that there is still very much a demand for high density monocultures of fisheries with carping. When you're seeing people catching 600, 700, 800 pounds of fish in 5 or 6 hours. Do you have to ask if that's particularly good fish welfare and a good way to promote our sport? But there's a market there for it. It gets people into the sport, it gets people catching fish, and hopefully it hooks them in for a little bit longer. But there's lots of things we could talk about around fish stocking, but what we're going to look at now is how we can actually assess the stock of our fish. If we just next slide, please, Alex. There are lots of ways to find fish and catch fish and record fish. You are all working with fisheries. So rod and line is going to be an obvious one. You can use what we call creel surveys. You can go out and you can actually talk to the anglers. You can use catch returns. There's a whole raft of traps and nets and things you can use. But again, if you're going to put any of these in place, please do, make sure you know what you're doing. If you think you need to have a seine net pulled or anything, you need to put any traps in place for particular species, please do consult the experts. Make sure you've got all the paperwork in place and you know what you're doing beforehand. And then we've got these new pieces of technology as well. You can do things like hydroacoustics. You can put a camera in, and if you just look on that right hand side there, you'll see it's just started to move. Thank you, Alex. And this is a bit of footage from a system called an ARIS camera. And you'll notice, and if you are any good at your fish ID, you'll see that was a nice pike that we caught on the camera there, and it actually sat head on and did a little bit of a dance for us before it swam off. And this is just a fixed point camera. It's slightly more technical than just a camera, but it's a new and modern way of looking for fish in particular environments. And then the latest and greatest in fish fish finding technology is eDNA. Yeah, and you can have an eDNA suite done for your water, and it will tell you with some degree of accuracy exactly how many fish are in there, and we can read that, and we can start to use it to form a picture of what's in the pond. Next slide, please, Alex. If you're not sure about what's in your pond, can I suggest you quickly find out? There's 2 good guides on there. Mark Everard's done some wonderful books. I'm sure you've all come across Mark. He's pretty well known as a very good angler as well, and he's got 2 or 3 good guides. This one that came out a couple of years ago. It's a brilliant one to throw in your rucksack. It's got a waterproof cover, really nice picture. Jack Perks has been involved with some of the photography in there, so you know they're going to be bang on. If you want to go into a little bit more detail and you want to start looking at fish and keying them out and be learning about the key features, then the one on the left it is another one. You can buy those through the Field Studies Council. They're about £4 or £5 each. Again, it's another useful one, probably maybe one to put in your clubhouse or whatever for people to have a flick through, and that's done by a chap called Alwyn Wheeler, who's the old fish curator for the Natural History Museum. So yeah, just a little bit of an aid there, really. Next slide, please, Alex. So yeah, so just looking at stock and looking at what we refer to as the carrying capacity. How many fish can our water hold? And there's lots of variables to bring into this. We're talking about habitat. We're talking about the amount of nutrients in there. That's have we got enough nutrients to support the bottom end of the food chain? These plants and algae, and how much space have we got to push to put these fish into? So if you look at your productivity of your lake, and I'm sure you're all aware, it's driven at the bottom of the food chain is driven by the production of plants and algae. And as we start to move on, excuse me, and we start to move up those sort of trophic levels, we start to bring in the invertebrates, the shrimps, snails, and daphne that feed on the plants and algae that in turn our fish feed on. And then we go up, the 100 kilos of roach, it can feed on a ton of shrimp, which in turn will allow you to get roughly 10 kilos of pike in that body of water. And if we can increase that productivity, we can start to increase the amount of fish that pond can support. Where we sometimes push this out of kilter is we don't increase the productivity, we just shove more fish in. And very, very quickly, that status quo is pushed out of equilibrium. And then our shrimps, our bait snails, and our daphne get rapidly exhausted. And our fish are compromised. That's when we need to start thinking about what can we do to supplement that feeding of our fish, and maybe do we need to be adding in some additional feed to support those fish if they've exhausted that natural larder, if you like, that's available for them. Next slide, please, Alex. And you'll see on here is a quite a famous diagram was produced by Ian Cowkes at the University of Hull, and you've got 2 sides of the line here. We're basically looking at fish stocks, factors increasing fish numbers in here, so we can add stock, and you've got other areas, so you've got planned stockings, you've got unplanned, illegal or accidental stockings in there. And you'll notice below, there's a lot more below the line than there is above the line. So those factors that decrease fish numbers might be cropping. We've got unsuitable species in there. So this is an active piece of fishery management that we can put into our management planning. Do we think we've got the right stock? Have we got too many fish? Got the wrong species of fish? It doesn't suit our fishery type. Well, let's get rid of them. We can crop them out, and then we can maybe think about adding some additional stocking in lieu of those fish to suit the fishery type that we're aiming for. And you'll notice on there as well, if you just look below the cropping circle, you've got predation, obvious one. We don't need to major on predation this evening, but you've got a whole range of different predator impacts there. And then you've also going to bring into there a bit more about other mortalities. You've got angling mortality, you've got natural mortality. Again, you're going to bring in other factors in there, so disease and parasitism, which again, we can maybe limit a little bit through some of the work we're doing with our fishery and our habitat. you are going to obviously lose fish through old age, and there's going to be that competitive element, that starvation element, if your fishery becomes too heavily stocked. So we just move on, please, Alex. So yeah, stocking. When do we want to stock fish? Yeah, obvious ones. When we're looking at the creation of a new fishery, when we're looking at restoration of a fishery, maybe we've lost fish, or we've had a disease outbreak, or there's been a pollution incident, or maybe we're trying to change the fishery type. We're taking it from, from a sort of low stock specimen type water to a more of a mixed fishery, because we want to open it up for other anglers within our club, or other angler types, or change the market. We might need to replace fish have been predated on, and we won't go again into fairy and feathery predators, but we know what they are. And we might want to try and mitigate a problem. You might want to use a slightly heavier stocking of carp to try and control some of the vegetation, and this biological control is something we've seen used to some degree of success, on top of other management strategies. We're talking about planning and fishery management here. If we deem that we've got invasive aquatic plants in them, we want to try and control them, do we need to look at mechanical control, or with some dyes, and then putting other things in, other species of fish in, maybe as a short-term action to try and get on top of that vegetation. Again, tearing up a bit, stop it from regrowing or rooting or whatever it might be. So there's lots of reasons when we need to stock fish, but it's all about getting that balance right. Just next slide, Alex. And I think what we also need to look at is that use of the water column. We tend to lots of fisheries err towards this bottom end. They stick breaming and carping and tension, and stick them all on top of each other. I think, again, important thing to realise here is you shouldn't be stocking bream, carp and tench at any sort of densities on top of each other, because carp more often than not outcompete everything else, and the other fish start to suffer. But above that sort of that benthic layer, you've got a whole water column to play with there. So the other fish you could stock to feed at different levels and to maximize that water. Can you put some bream and roach often go together, don't they? Crucians and tench and rudd you'll often see stocked together, because they're not competing in those same some sort of feeding niches, and they give the anglers a different fish to target in sort of different areas, and different again at sort of different times of year as well. So you can maximize the productivity of your fishery by using the whole of the water column, and not just going, well, we'll just raft more carp in, and the anglers like catching bream, or the angler, carp and cruisers. Well, we know they don't go together, so why would you try and sort of force the matter by putting them all together? Or there was a trend years ago, wasn't there, for shoving hide in and shoving them in at massive numbers, and then they had this uncanny knack of disappearing after a short amount of time. So think about how your fishery is structured. And obviously, we're talking about depth and size here as well, but you've got lots of space to play with. Use it and maximize it as best you can. Next slide, please. Just really wanted to just sort of finish by touching a little bit on fish health. And again, this is an important element of fishery management and management planning, is the health and welfare of our animals. And animal welfare, you can read that for yourself, but we're looking here at healthy, comfortable, well-nourished, safe, able to express innate behaviour, and it's not suffering from unpleasant states such as pain, fear and distress. And so can we, when we're looking at our fisheries, give those fish the best health, environment and welfare that we possibly can? And so this is where we need to start looking at that fish health issue. And again, there's lots of factors that play into fish health, from water quality to nutrition to predation to stress levels to pollution to angling pressure, the habitat type. So there's lots of things we need to really consider. And all I've done really here is just banged a few images just as a bit of an aid. So next slide, please. So we've got whole heaps of parasites out there. So these are some of the Ergocillid family that you may have come across. Some of you are aware of them as sort of the old category 2 parasites. I think a couple of them have come off the old Cat 2 list now, but these are some of the ones that we need to be aware of. And there's loads of others. This is just a nice slide, and I'll just give thanks to Ian Welby for these next few slides as well, because I borrowed them off him. So the whole raft of invertebrates out there, internal, external, ones you can see at the sort of a macro scale, and ones you really can't, ones you need to sort of dissect out. So there's a whole heap of them. And if any of you ever any problems with parasites, then please do consult a fish health expert and get a fish health check done. But just to show you the next slide, just again, thank you to Ian for this. I've sort of borrowed it from him, and you can see some ergocillids on the gills of a fish, and you can see the head of the parasite is towards the bottom of the slide, and you can see the egg sacs coming off the back. And these things are just nasty little parasites, sit on the gills, get into the gill tissue, and just sit there and gorge on the tissue and the blood and other nutrients, and incredibly irritating to the fish. There's a whole heap of health issues with any of these sorts of parasites. If they're on the category 2 list and you have a health check and you want to move these fish as part of a cropping program, then you can, unless you're moving them to another water with a similar parasite. So it is important that we've got a handle on these sorts of things. And then there's other elements to consider, so we just move it on. You've got bacterial infections. Lots of bacteria are found naturally in fisheries, and they don't often cause a great deal of problems. When they start to grow, when we often see them manifest themselves as being problematic, is when fish are stressed. You stress the fish, you lower the immune system, and often these bacterial infections show themselves with poor water quality. You've got too many fish, low oxygen levels, so again a bit more stress in there. You've got angler mistreatment, they've lifted scales with bad angling practice, or been dropped on a mat and the scales have come off, or they've had some damage where they've run through a snag, or you might stock some new fish, and those fish are carrying these bacteria with them, and these novel strains of bacteria which the fish you're already existing in your fishery are naive to. It is the perfect environment for these new novel bacteria to take a hold. So again, we need to be aware of what the risks are and what we could potentially bring onto our fishery. So next slide, please. So again, this is all part of our planning. How are we going to prevent disease prevention? Well, what can we do? Well, we've touched on all of these. We've talked about stress, we've talked about water quality, stocking, wound and angler damage minimization. Are anglers using Medicarp and Medikits? And I'm pleased to say lots of anglers carry them now. We've got appropriate unhooking mats. Are we providing our anglers? We're talking about biosecurity planning here. Are we providing keep nets? Are we providing landing nets, unhooking mats, waistslings? We're trying to minimize that risk as much as we can through having good biosecurity plans in place. Is there an expectation that anglers have cradles for weighing and hooking and measuring fish? Do you ban sacks and things, or are you stopping certain sizes of fish going in keep nets to stop them being bashed about? Do you put keep net weight limits on for matches? There's lots of things you can do to minimize that risk of those fish becoming unduly stressed, or even to that's damage that leads to that secondary infection from these opportunistic bacteria and parasites and things getting in. Next slide, please. And again, something to have on in your planning. What do you do if a disease or mortality occurs? Try and reduce that stress as best you can, and the easiest way to do that is to stop fishing. Do a full suite of water, get your water quality check first. Start with with disinfection, again part of your biosecurity plan. Prevent it coming in. Some of these iodophore based disinfectants, or Vercon and things like that, to try and limit the risk of them coming onto your fishery. And then if you start to see a sustained mortality, contact your and get them out to do to have a look at your health, the health of the fish, and do some checks, and incorporate all this into your plan. So next slide, please, Alex. And then, trying to stop these exotic pathogens. We said about your fishery being naive to new fish. So sorry, to be bacteria, things that can be brought in on new fish. So is there an alternative? Well, can we improve natural recruitment? Can we encourage our fish to breed and give us more fish? Breed your own. Limits the risk and it reduces the cost. We can start to bring our own fish through, and often fish that are born within the water, if you like, are recruited in the water, are a bit more robust. They're not as naive as some of the stockfish that you see, particularly if you've got predation issues and things. And if you want, you're thinking about bringing other fish in, can the fishery sustain that population you've got? But never mind, sort of supporting more fish and bringing more fish into the water. So again, it's all about getting as much information as you can and starting to put that together into this wider plan, and incorporating it and considering all of the factors before we just go for let's get the fish dealer on the phone and we'll just buy a lot more fish. Those fish can bring with them problems that you may not necessarily need if you manage the fishery effectively. And I just put this next slide, please, Alex. I'm sure you've come across this before. This is that buyer beware, that 10-point plan. You often see it in quite a few bits of literature. And this is just the thing you want to be aware of when you're buying your fish. And there's a few key elements here. Often cheap fish are cheap for a reason. So think about is it a good deal? Get your fish from reputable farmers or dealers. Talk to other fisheries in the area. Build up a rapport with your fish dealer. Talk to them. Use them regularly. Go and visit the farm. Make sure you're happy with the fish you're buying. Looking at the biosecurity elements within the farm itself. If you're going to the farm, go visit the day they're catching your fish, and also be there when your fish are stocked. Don't just chuck a key to the guy in the van and say, there you go, they want to go in there, sling him somewhere around peg 1. Make sure you're there when they're stocked. If you don't want the fish, if you're not happy with them, if it's not what you ordered, then you say no. There's nothing forcing you to have those fish, particularly if they're not what you've ordered, the right size, the right species, or I've chucked in a few extras for you. Well, no, I didn't really ask for them, did I? I want what I paid for. And if in doubt, talk to your local EA fisheries team or your local fishery experts and get a bit of advice before you go ahead and sink a considerable amount of money into your stock. And just one last slide, really, just to pull this together. There are loads of other things you could put on your system. Put on your management plan. Habitat improvement. We could come back every night and talk about a different habitat improvement technique. There's water quality improvements. We can add artificial aeration. We can look at managing leaf litter, silt, inputs, outputs. There's a whole raft of things we can do around water quality, linked in again to habitat. How many pegs have you got? How many numbers can you get on there? Fishery rules. That again, it's a nice debate to often have with anglers and at committee meetings. What rules we're going to have for our fishery then, folks? And you'll get 50 different people with 50 different ideas. Same applies to bait. What do you want people to feed your fish? This is the nutrition is quite key here. We're not saying wholesale bait bans rile anglers up, but sensible bait bans. I think most anglers nowadays can appreciate that. We want the fish to have the nutrition to be as healthy as they can. Predation control, loads of info out there about that. Biosecurity plan again, should be rigid, should be enforced, and anglers should do as you say with regards to biosecurity. And then one often that does get missed when you're talking about management plans is what's your staffing and what's your admin? How do anglers pay? How do they book on? Are you using a booking website? Or are you relying on people, the goodwill of your volunteers to go walking around twice a day to check club books or collect their ticket money? Again, there's lots of new technology out there that allows us to mitigate that pressure of people having to walk around, that they then can put into the more time to actually supporting the fishery and being eyes on the fishery. And again, the same applies to websites. What's your website like? People don't wait for the Angling Times anymore to do fishery in focus, do they? They go straight onto the internet. They go onto the websites and they look at the quality of the website to show what what you've got to offer them. So it's an angler's market out there. So you've got to make sure that all these things are taken into consideration. And I think, Alex, that's it. That's a whistle-stop tour of I do catch fish. Look, there's one of fishery management planning. And if there's anybody's got any questions or any elements you think I haven't touched on that you'd like a bit of info on, then yeah, I think now's the time.